Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. What a wonderful time to be alive. Roe v. Wade no longer exists. Praise God and thank you, Donald Trump, for nominating 3 Supreme Court justices. And a special thank you to Ruth Bader Ginsburg for not retiring under Barack Obama at the ripe young age of 86. And instead staying in the Supreme Court, thinking that Hillary was of course going to become the next president, and then nominate her replacement as the first woman president. And instead Trump won and got to replace Ruth Bader Ginsburg with Amy Coney Barrett. What an incredible turn of events it is. Like literally, if that didn't happen, if Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, you know what, I'm 84, I'm going to retire now under while Barack Obama's president. If she did that, then Roe v. Wade would not have been overturned. Amazing. So today's special is about Roe v. Wade and about abortion. Coming up in the last segment, I'm going to give some advice on how to talk to pro-abortion people, especially as their heads are still exploding. As the Babylon Bee the other day said, protests are expected to move from mostly peaceful to somewhat peaceful. So I got some advice on how to do that. Also, we're going to dive deep into the legal aspects of this decision. How was this decided? This is important to know. And once you know this, you'll be smarter than 99% of people on this who don't take the time to actually read it. And then we're going to talk to someone who survived an abortion attempt, right? When she was the fetus, she was the clump of cells, and she survived. And we're also going to debunk one of the most used, most popular today pro-abortion talking points, and that is that it is better to kill a kid than to have it be born into poverty or to parents who aren't ready. Better just to kill it now. We will debunk that talking point. If that's true, by the way, if that were true, if that disgusting argument were true, then why stop with only killing kids before they're born? Why not also kill any kid who's currently in poverty or in the foster system? Or any adult who's in poverty, or any adult who's disabled, or just anyone who's a drain on the system at all. Why stop even there? Let's just kill anyone who we don't want around anymore. And this is called eugenics. Eugenics was very popular among progressives in the 20s. Like the head of the Ivy League schools all supported eugenics in the 20s. Unfortunately for them, it was enacted by Hitler in the 30s and 40s, kind of gave the systematic murdering of people based on arbitrary characteristics a bad name, and eugenics fell out of style in America, except for abortion. That one stayed. This idea that it's better to kill the undesirables, right? Maybe we can't kill the undesirables after they're born. Okay, we can't do that, but at least we can kill them before they're born. That's what people are saying today. And these are the people who think that they have the moral high ground on this issue. Margaret Sanger, she is the founder of what became Planned Parenthood. She wrote in 1922, she wrote a book called The Pivot of Civilization. And she said, we are paying for and even submitting to the dictates of an ever-increasing, unceasingly spawning class of human beings who never should have been born at all. How about that? An unceasingly spawning class of human beings who never should have been born at all. They're the ones calling the shots, so it's better just to kill them now. That's the founding mentality of Planned Parenthood. And that same mentality exists today. In that same book, there's a whole chapter called, it's free online. You can just Google The Pivot of Civilization. You can read the book yourself. It's called, she has a chapter called The Cruelty of Charity. You want to talk about the difference in worldview? You want to talk about the Christian worldview, where charity is a value and a virtue, versus this atheist, pagan worldview, where they talk about the cruelty of charity? Goodness gracious. So she starts off this chapter quoting Herbert Spencer. Herbert Spencer is an important guy. He, in 1864, he was the guy who coined the term survival of the fittest. People think Charles Darwin came up with that. He didn't write that, right? This guy did. He read Charles Darwin's Origin of Species, and he came up with this term, survival of the fittest. And he was a eugenicist as well, right? He only wanted the fit humans to breed, the proper, the right people to breed, right? Margaret Sanger said the opposite of people she called them human weeds. Right, and worse, which we'll get to in a second. But anyway, Spencer, right? So this is Spencer on charity. So this is charity to women and babies, right? He says charity is bad because it helps the weak And we don't want to help the weak. We want to kill the weak. This is what he said. Fostering the good for nothing, the poor, at the expense of the good is an extreme cruelty. It is a deliberate storing up of miseries for future generations. There's no greater curse to posterity, the future, than that of bequeathing them an increasing population of imbeciles. He says we need to stop giving charity to poor people. Okay, this is the argument of these people, and we still see it today. Here's Margaret saying her last one. Philanthropy encourages the healthier and more normal sections of the world to shoulder the burden of unthinking and indiscriminate fecundity, I mean just birthing of others, which brings with it, as I think the reader must agree, a dead weight of human waste. That's who she believes the poor are. The founder of Planned Parenthood, she believes the poor are and black people, by the way, are a dead weight of human waste. Instead of decreasing and aiming to eliminate the stocks of people that are most detrimental to the future of the race and the world, charity, tends to render them to a menacing degree dominant. What in the world? So this idea that it's better to kill certain types of people is nothing new. And it's just a bummer for those people that Hitler was really good at the mass killing of the wrong types of people. But we still do it today. You know, more black babies are aborted in New York City than are born. Think about that. More black babies are killed before they're born than are born. The abortion rate for black women nationwide is 5 times the abortion rate for white women. Talk about disparate outcomes. Oh, we hear about from the left are disparate outcomes, and every time there's a disparate outcome, it means there's racism involved. You want to talk about disparate outcomes? 5 times the rate. But for some reason, to the left, this one isn't racist. You are. Think about that. I think this is like mind-boggling. If Republicans are the racist ones, as we're always told, right? You would think it would be Republicans who would be calling for more black babies to be killed, right? You'd think it'd be Republicans who would want more black babies to be murdered. The more the merrier. If we're the racist, this is what a racist would want, right? A racist would say, hey, there's too many black babies. Let's put these buildings in the ghetto where pregnant black women can go, and we'll just kill their babies for them. It'll be great. You would think that's what Republicans would be saying. The way that the left says conservatives are racist, you'd think we'd be the ones who would want this. But it's not conservatives who want this. It's progressives who are pushing this on abortion on lower income people of color. And they are the ones who believe they have the moral high ground. Isn't that incredible? It was Jesse Jackson himself. 1977, he wrote this beautiful essay against abortion, right? This is before he fell in line with the Democratic talking points, right? So he wrote this editorial. You just Google Jesse Jackson abortion 1977, it'll pop up. And he called it a black genocide, right? Black people are 13% of the population, but 37% of all abortions. And he wrote, at the end, he said, what happens to the mind of a person and the moral fabric of a nation that accepts the aborting of the life of a baby without a pang of conscience? And I encourage you to read the whole editorial, it's beautiful. But that was 1977. Today we have a shout your abortion movement today, right? What is that shout your abortion movement? Well, that's an attempt to cover up that pang of conscience that someone has. We'll get to that later. You'll also hear people say, Slater, why do you even care? What do you even care? Why do you even care so much? It's not your body. That's a pretty simple answer. It's better to live in a society that doesn't kill babies. Even the poor ones, even the black ones. Amazing. In Germany, the first people that Hitler killed, it wasn't the Jews. People think it was the Jews. It wasn't the Jews. The first people that Hitler killed, the Nazis killed, were the Lebensunwertens Lebens, the life unworthy of life. Those were people with disabilities. It started with 5,000 disabled children and then adults. You can look up Action T4 if you want to learn more about this. It's better not to live in a country that kills people. Let me flip it around. It's better to live in a country that doesn't kill people, no matter how undesirable they are. or no matter how much one side wants to dehumanize them as property or a waste, as human weeds, or as a clump of cells. I'll end here for now because we got a lot of great guests. The battle, a major battle, has been won, a huge battle. But the war is just beginning in the sense that now this goes to the states. So now we got 50 battles. But also, more than even that politically, we need to get to the heart of this issue. The soul of our nation and our national conscience is at stake here. And we need to work to become a society that would never even contemplate abortion. That's my goal. Even if it were legal, people would never even contemplate it. I bet there's some states in America today where slavery is technically legal, right? There's states that didn't exist until after 1865. So let's say Idaho, right? Idaho probably doesn't have a law against slavery, right? They weren't a state until after slavery ended. So they never got around to saying you can't have slaves or something. But no one would ever consider having slaves in Idaho, right? It's not like someone's like, oh, it's legal, I guess I'll do it now. You would never do it. It's morally reprehensible. It's a moral abomination, even if it might be legal. So we need to get abortion to be just as inconceivable as that in America. And in order to make that happen, we need to appeal to something even higher than the Supreme Court for that type of redemption in America. So yes, it's time to celebrate, but it's also time to do even, I should say, it is time to celebrate, and it's time to do even more to love and serve women who are in a crisis pregnancy. So please call and donate and volunteer at your local pro-life pregnancy center. They need you. These pro-life centers are the opposite of Planned Parenthood, and they are saving lives every day. Please join their cause. Coming up next, we'll jump into the legal aspects, the legal arguments of Alito, and talk about the dissent as well. Do that next. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, welcome back to our special about Roe v. Wade. Now, I mentioned at the top of the hour, we got to thank Ruth Bader Ginsburg for not retiring under Obama. And of course, we have to thank Donald J. Trump, who called pretty much this exact same thing during one of the debates.
Do you want to see the court overturn Roe v. Wade?
Well, if we put another 2 or perhaps 3 justices on, that's really what's going to be, that will happen. And that'll happen automatically, in my opinion, because I am putting pro-life justices on the court. I will say this, it will go back to the states, and the states will then make a determination.
Called it. Will Chamberlain is here, senior counsel at the Article 3 Project, and he had a great tweet the other day. He said, Planned Parenthood should be thrilled at this because they're now able to focus on providing all of that non-abortion medical care that they constantly remind us about. Will, how are you, brother?
Doing great. Good to be here with you.
I'm grateful you're here. Now, my not legally trained mind, if I can articulate this, please correct me where I'm wrong, says that because the right to abortion is not explicitly written in the 14th Amendment from 1865, if it's not explicitly there, then one must prove that this hidden right, this penumbra, this hidden right, is deeply rooted in our nation's history and traditions. And the court, Alito leading it, said it is not deeply rooted in our nation's history and tradition, therefore it is not there at all. Is that right? Am I missing anything with that analysis?
You've nailed it. That's exactly how the analysis goes. It's not to say that there are no rights that Americans possess beyond those explicitly spelled out in the Bill of Rights and the other amendments to the Constitution. It's to say that if the court is going to recognize an unenumerated right on what's called substantive due process grounds, then there has to be substantial evidence that that right is rooted in our nation's history and traditions, so that we're not just making up rights on the fly. And so Alito, using that framework, analyzed the so-called abortion right and said it's not there.
So in the dissent, who wrote the dissent? Was it Breyer?
It was Breyer, yeah, Breyer.
Okay, so it's funny, when I read it as Sotomayor's voice. I don't know why I read it in her voice, but anyway, so Breyer wrote, he said, that's irrelevant just because the white men of 1865 were taking away rights from women doesn't mean we need to be taking rights away from women today still. What do you say to that?
I mean, that's not how this is analyzed at all, right? I mean, the question of whether or not the Constitution forbids the states from legislating on an issue is not the same question as to like what the appropriate policy is in 2022. And the thing to keep in mind is that nothing about what Alito is saying precludes any state from enacting their own abortion laws, including really, abortion laws we'd consider appalling and contemptible in the sense that, the state of California already has a law that says basically you're allowed to get an abortion up until right before birth. And based on what I read from the Supreme Court, I mean, they would say we don't take any view on that. Basically, the Supreme Court's view is that the Constitution doesn't speak to abortion, which seems pretty obviously correct, and that this is a state issue.
What do you make of Justice Roberts, who he said we should leave for another day whether to reject any right to an abortion at all? So he punted on it again. He said, Mississippi, I guess they're right, so I side with the majority on that, but I'm going to side with the minority view that we should not overturn Roe v. Wade. What do you make of him and his analysis?
I thought his analysis was very weak, and I think that the Alito opinion did a very good job of laying out why. Roberts is talking about how bad it is to disturb precedent and to create like a lack of consistency in these rulings. But Alito points out that Justice Roberts would get rid of the viability rule and replace it with his completely invented reasonable opportunity to get an abortion standard, right? As opposed to, is the fetus viable? It's now the new rule would be, does the woman have a reasonable opportunity, which would lead to its own level of like, the court would still have to get involved, figure out what that reasonable opportunity meant. And also, that's not precedential, right? If you're saying we need to respect precedent, well, you're just invented something new. There's no basis in precedent for that rule. And neither the petitioners or the respondents or nobody advocated for this except Judge Roberts. So he's just trying to find, it's a classic Roberts where he's so obviously trying to, toe the line, and, he's so focused on the legitimacy of the court that he proposes doing very illegitimate things.
Yeah, like with Obamacare. What's
right.
that standard? I'm sorry, I'm missing that standard. What's this new standard that he was talking about?
A reasonable opportunity to get an abortion, right? So basically he's saying the idea is that he could uphold the Mississippi law on that basis because 15 weeks is enough time to get an abortion, like a reasonable opportunity. Sorry, my glasses are just bothering me right now. I just need to get fixed up a little bit. So a reasonable opportunity to get an abortion would be, but there's no, again, like you're like, what does that mean? Nobody knows what that means. That's why Alito and others rejected it out of hand.
Oh. Okay, what do you think about this settled law argument? That's one of the arguments. We've had it around forever, or 50 years now, and you can't break precedent. What do you make of that?
I mean, the rejoinder to that is that, most of the court's most famous rulings break precedent. Brown versus Board broke the precedent of Plessy v. Ferguson and separate but equal. And so that's not sufficient. Simply saying something is precedent is not sufficient to say that it should be upheld, right? The court has ways of evaluating precedent. And I think one of the things that Alito did, which was very smart, is, there was a second abortion case after Roe. There was Planned Parenthood v. Casey. And the Casey case tried to say, okay, we're reaffirming Roe v. Wade. But Alito pointed out they never actually evaluated Roe as the logical coherence and sensibility of Roe. They just said, well, it was precedent, so we're doing it. And so Alito says, because of that, Casey's not that particularly valuable as precedent either. So let's go back and look at Roe. Okay, here are all the things wrong with it. It's completely fabricated out of whole cloth. Has no real constitutional basis. It's a mess of an opinion. And when you think about it, the 14th Amendment never contemplated anything like abortion. The idea that there's an abortion right hidden in the 14th Amendment is nonsensical.
On the precedent argument, Breyer said, sure, Brown v. Board of Education overruled Plessy v. Ferguson, which said separate but equals okay. But that was a unanimous decision. Like that was a no-brainer, slam dunk, obvious thing. This one is still too contentious of an issue to overturn.
I don't think that makes any sense at all. The idea that just the number of justices who agree, there's a majority of the court that agrees that it should be overturned, so it's going to be overturned. That's how our court works.
What do you make about the legality of a nationwide abortion ban? Before I do that, let me ask this question. Why could let's go to the extremist pro-life argument, which is this is life, and the Constitution protects a person's right to life. Why could the court not ban abortion nationwide? Now, again, we can talk about the why is that wise or not, but like constitutionally, couldn't they also say, well, like states can't decide like is murder legal or not in their states of an adult? So why should states be able to decide if it's murder for an unborn child as well? Why couldn't they have gone that last step?
I don't know. I know that there is this 14th Amendment argument out there from, I think, scholars like John Finnis and Robert George that says that abortion as a procedure should be seen as unconstitutional, period, right? That, and that no state should be allowed to sanction abortion, because if they do, then they're not providing equal protection to unborn life. Now, I have not done the research to feel like really strongly one way or the other. I can say as a practical matter that view doesn't really have enough purchase to get enacted into law. I mean, one of the things that Judge Kavanaugh's concurrence made clear is that he didn't agree with that view. And I think that ultimately it's a hard sell for the court that just said the abortion is now a state's issue. You know, we similarly think the Constitution doesn't speak of abortion, to now then again change gears and say, actually, we were wrong about that particular point. The Constitution does speak to abortion and you're not allowed to do it anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, we can save it for another day. I just, there's a ton of comparisons between slavery and abortion, I think.
Sure.
And one of them is leaving slavery up to the states didn't work out for long.
Sure, but I mean, there's also, the counter would be that there's an explicit constitutional amendment specifically mentioning slavery and prohibiting it. That's the 13th Amendment.
So on the Constitution, so on the constitutional amendment part, I just read this tweet from Ben Shapiro. He said the only true path to nationalize the abortion issue is a new constitutional amendment, and he made this point that there be no congressional codification, because the Congress has no power to regulate the intrastate treatment of abortion. So what's the future of this, right? Can a national law be proposed either way, right? Like where abortion is legal or illegal nationwide, or does it have to go to a constitutional amendment?
I mean, based on Commerce Clause regulations, I think that has to be, I think Shapiro is right, that there's probably no federal power to regulate abortion in the 50 states. I could see there being, you could create a federal law that dealt somehow with some sort of with an interstate commerce hook. So for example, maybe the federal government could ban the transportation of people across state lines to get an abortion, right? Like that would be something. But I think based on the Commerce Clause precedents that the conservatives in the court, got enacted, that I don't think that there would be a basis for the federal government to outright ban abortion in all 50 states.
So it had to be a constitutional amendment, which is a tough sell. Like somehow preventing people from crossing state lines. That's, listen, as pro-life as I am, that seems like a really difficult. I don't even know how you would like technically do that, right? Like some woman is Oklahoma and she wants to fly to California and they like stop her, like TSA stops her.
Well, it's like, maybe you could. I don't know if you could. You can't prevent the individual person from crossing state lines, right? That's a fundamental right to travel. That's one of those unenumerated rights that people have, right? You have the unimpeded constitutional right to travel between states as a citizen. The question is sort of like kind of thinking along like human trafficking lines, like how you're not allowed to, pay money or to facilitate someone else transporting themselves for sex or something like that. Like you could make an argument that you're not allowed to facilitate other people facilitate others transporting themselves to get an abortion, right, for the explicit purpose of that.
Okay.
So
we got to think more about that. Again, as a pro-life person, that seems a little like I don't love that, but we can see how that moves forward. My last question for you is: what did Clarence Thomas say about? We got the quote here about potentially using or going after the 14th Amendment rights of gay marriage and contraception and stuff like that. What is he doing there?
Well, he's implicating the entire substantive due process doctrine, which is kind of not an unreasonable thing to do from a legal perspective, because, when you think about due process and the natural intuitive understanding of it, it's procedural protections. Like the government can't take away your property, your life without a hearing, without giving you notice, without a fair trial. I mean, all these procedural protections. But over time, the court has interpreted due process more expansively to say that there are some things that are so precious that no process is sufficient to deprive you of your rights of them. And that's the substantive due process theory. Now, what Clarence Thomas is saying is that's just nonsense. Like, that's not what due process means. It's never what it meant. And, you know, we should, all the precedents that were based on that theory need to be reevaluated. And he's actually, what he's not saying is that some of those rights couldn't be identified from another part of the Constitution, namely like the Privileges and Immunities Clause or something like that. What he is saying is substantive due rights is terrible legal doctrine because it just doesn't make sense. It imports substance into the protections of a procedural right, like your procedural right to due process, and that's wrong. But that also, another point is that his view on this is idiosyncratic. That's not how Alito made his decision. Alito did not reject substantive due process. He applied substantive due process doctrine to Roe and found Roe wanting.
Yes, very interesting. All right, we got to run. I hate it, Will. We'll talk again. Will Chamberlain, Article 3 Project. Thanks for your time, brother.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks for your insight, very much. Coming up next, we're going to talk to a woman who had an abortion and is now a pro-life activist, and a woman who is a survivor of an abortion procedure. Talk about that next. Spread the word. Slater Crusaders, I'm so grateful for our next two guests as we continue our celebration of the end of Roe v. Wade. Claire Caldwell is here. She survived being aborted. I think before the break I said she survived an abortion procedure. She was the baby who was being aborted. That's the survival there. And she's featured in the new documentary Choosing Death, The Legacy of Roe. That's on the Daily Wire. That's a must watch. Also, Catherine Glenn Foster. She's president and CEO of the wonderful Americans United for Life. Ladies, both of you, thank you so much for being here and all the work you've done over the years for the pro-life cause. Catherine, I want to go to you first, but before I ask you the question, everyone needs to see this clip of you recently in front of Congress.
Is candidly and openly calling for a nationwide ban on all abortions with no exceptions for rape or incest. And if I've got that wrong, I would invite Ms. Foster to correct me. Do I have it wrong, yes or no?
If we added rape and incest exceptions, would you vote for it?
Okay, I reclaim my time, of course.
Classic, perfect, amazing. Catherine, many, I'd argue say most, pro-life advocates have a direct connection with abortion. Can you help us understand what's going through a woman's mind when they're in a crisis pregnancy and what was going through your mind when you were, was it 19, is that right?
I was 19 years old, yes. You know, we're at an inflection point in American history when the Supreme Court has finally overturned Roe v. Wade. And finally, I pray women, young women like me at age 19 will not feel they have no other choice but to seek an abortion. When I was 19 and I found myself unexpectedly pregnant, I was terrified. Jaw-dropping doesn't even begin to describe it. I had no idea what to do, where to turn. I tried to grasp out for resources and got none. And so I ended up feeling incredibly alone, powerless, pressured, and in the end, coerced.
How did you feel after?
Devastated. While I was on that table, I realized that that was the wrong choice. Everything that happened behind those closed doors of the abortion facility was wrong. It felt wrong in my gut, in my soul. I knew that it was wrong. I was asking questions. They weren't giving answers. Eventually, it was a forced abortion, and there's no other word for it. It was gut-wrenching. So when I was able to pull myself together enough to leave that abortion facility, the healing process had just begun, and really it took years to try to recover from that experience, because it was just there's nothing like the pain of a soul being ripped out of you. There's just nothing like it, and that's a regret you live with for the rest of your life.
Kat, thanks for sharing all that. I'm super grateful. Claire, hello, by the way. You have a remarkable story. We don't have time to share all of it here, but you are the living rebuke of what I think is maybe the top talking point right now for the pro-abortion cause, and that is, well, all these kids are going to be born into poverty, and all these kids are going to be born into bad families. So it's better for them to die. It's better to kill them than it is for a kid to be born into poverty. What do you say to that?
Well, that certainly would have been my circumstance. My birth mother was 13 years old. She was not ready to be a mother. Her parents were divorced. She definitely didn't have a life full of privilege, and so that could have been my circumstance. But I was chosen through adoption by my parents. I've had an incredible life, and I think that no circumstance can define my humanity, can define any other child's humanity. And I don't think that we have that right to decide that based on circumstances, someone is more human or less human because of these unfortunate possibilities. And so fortunately for me, I was chosen by my family. I've had an incredible life regardless of my circumstances. And, I've had disabilities. I was born alive after an abortion procedure that aborted my twin. I still suffer from the hip and foot complications that I was born with because of that abortion. But I am so grateful for my life. And I've met so many people who have been affected by abortion, who have survived abortions, and all of us have said that very same thing, that regardless of our circumstances, regardless of finding out that we survived an abortion, we were affected by abortion, we regret our abortions, maybe we didn't have the greatest circumstances growing up, every single one of us are grateful for our lives and our human.
Sorry, I want to ask you both the same question with a little different nuance. So, Catherine, what do you say to the woman who, that's the beginning of the question for both of you, what do you say to the woman who was in the exact same situation you were in, who feels terrified, ashamed, scared to tell their family about the sleeping before marriage, the whole thing, right? And they're just so terrified and they feel there's no way out. Forget about the raging activists outside the Supreme Court with the bullhorn, right? But just like the woman who goes to a crisis pregnancy center and is so terrified about what's next. What do you say to that woman?
I would just say that we are here for you. You know, when a woman is in that situation, she's terrified. She doesn't know what to do. We're talking about the vast majority of all abortions where, you end up in that situation because you feel that there is no other way out. I was afraid to tell my family. I couldn't imagine disappointing them in that way. And so I think what's needed is time, is just taking a step back, taking a deep breath, and realizing that there are options out there. There are resources. There are people who are ready, willing, and able to love you and to love your child and to love your partner if you want him in your life and in your baby's life. There's just so many resources. There's so many options out there for you. And so it's just about connecting to them. We have much better ways to connect you now than we did back when I was 19. And I'm so pleased for that. I know that more and more women will be able to get connected with that and to be able to feel that peace and that hope. Because we know that there are 3 reasons why women tend to choose abortions. First trimester all the way through late term. Those elective abortions are for financial issues, relationship problems, and not feeling ready to be a parent. All of those are areas where we as a humane society can come alongside a young woman in need and can just love on her and support her and give her those resources. And that is exactly what we're here to do.
Catherine, what do you say specifically to the woman who maybe has plenty of money, right? But is just not ready, right? Or is climbing the ladder, the corporate ladder now. And I hear this a lot, like I wasn't ready to be a parent then, but now I am, and I'm grateful I had an abortion when I was younger because now I'm a famous actress or now I'm a lawyer or whatever it is, right? So this idea that abortion or that kids are like a hindrance to your success in America. What do you say to that woman?
Yeah, I mean, I think, need to focus on cultural change and spiritual change. For that, I think we need to just emphasize how valuable life is, that we are all unique, we're all fearfully and wonderfully made, and children are not a hindrance. Children are a blessing. A lot of us are not ready the first time we get pregnant, or the second, or the third, or the fourth. That's kind of the way it is. Sometimes it kind of blindsides us. But that doesn't matter because that child was put in our life for a reason. And sometimes it involves a little bit of a shift in mindset, right? Where we just think, I'm going to be grateful for this life. And we have no idea what blessings are going to come into our life because of that child. So I think we're a testimony to the fact that women can have a career. Women can be an actress or whatever it is you want to be, and also be a mother. And we shouldn't have to basically become more masculine. We're created to be our own thing. We shouldn't have to change who we are in order to be an actress or a lawyer or an advocate or no matter what we want to be. We can do both.
Amen. Claire, my last question for you is, what do you say to the woman who, and I get this a lot, is why do you even care? It's not your body. Who cares? Why do you care so much about this? What do you say to that?
Well, when I learned that I had survived my birth mother's abortion, I hadn't thought much about the abortion issue. And in that moment, as I sat face to face with my birth mother, she told me that she had had an abortion, that I had survived it, that my life was a miracle. It put a face and a name and a story and honestly humanity with that unborn child, because I realized in that moment that my body was not my birth mother's body. And so I often tell people, women they have a right to do with their own bodies what they wish. But the problem here is that the baby's body, my body, was not my birth mother's body. The baby's body is not the woman's body. And so that child has a separate set of DNA, separate humanity, and that child is worthy of life.
You both are wonderful. Claire Colwell, watch her in Choosing Death, The Legacy of Roe. It's on the Daily Wire. And Catherine Glenn Foster, President and CEO of Americans United for Life. Keep saving lives, ladies. So grateful for you.
Pleasure to be here.
Keep up the great work. Please Google your town and pro-life pregnancy center and find one near you. Coming up next, I'll give my advice on how to talk to someone who is pro-abortion. Coming up next. Hey, Slater Crusaders, grateful you're here. I want to talk about how to talk to someone about abortion, and specifically how to change their mind, right? You and I, we can debunk the talking points all day long, but if we don't know how to have that conversation, then it means nothing. Like, it's one thing to win an argument, but the art of changing someone's mind is very different than just winning an argument. I wrote a book about it. It's called How to Change Someone's Mind. So I'm the expert on this issue. No, I'm not, but I do have some suggestions and things to talk about, things to think about. First, before you embark on this mind-changing adventure, 3 points. There are different kinds of people, right? If you're talking to this person full of rage, trying to make them pro-life, you are not going to be successful at it. They're full of rage. I'm thinking more about like your coworker, or a friend of yours, someone you know, someone who respects you. That's what I'm talking about. Second, you got to consider the place. You're never going to change someone's mind at a political rally outside of the Supreme Court with a bullhorn. Or these people twerking, for instance. Like, that's not the place. People's defenses are too high. They'll never be humble enough to potentially ever change their mind. So just ignore those people for now. Third point, consider who else is around. One of the main reasons why people don't change their mind on anything is because they have to first admit that they were wrong. And no one ever wants to admit that they were wrong on anything, let alone something that's become such an identity issue, right? Like, I am a woman. I must be pro-choice. We're very tribal. We feel safe in our tribe. So the idea of leaving your tribe by now being pro-life, I'm leaving a safe space to an unknown. And to someone who's doing that, potentially doing that, it feels to people like they're betraying themselves, betraying their tribe, and they're voluntarily going out into the jungle to potentially be eaten by a saber-toothed tiger because I'm not going to a safe place that I know. So people go to incredible lengths to never admit that they were wrong because they feel safe where they are. So what do we do with that, right? So if you want to change someone's mind, you got to know who you're talking to, ideally someone you know and who respects you. 2, have a conversation. and keep the temperature low. Watch your tone, your body language. Watch theirs. As soon as their temperature goes up and they start to get defensive, and you're never going to change their mind in that moment. So keep it low. Keep the temperature low. Also, realize how hard it is for someone to admit they're wrong on something. Right? That's another reason why it has to be one-on-one. As soon as another person enters the conversation, people are way less likely to ever admit they're wrong. And then it becomes, I have to win the argument as opposed to actually listening and potentially changing my mind. Okay. Another point, be patient. You're not going to change, you're not going to talk to someone and they're just like fall on their knees like, oh, you are a genius. Oh, thank you for coming into my life and then saving me from myself with my terrible opinions. Oh, you're so, my Lord and Savior. No, that's never going to happen. You're planting seeds. That's all you're doing. It's not up for you to save the world in one conversation. So take that pressure off yourself and off that moment. One last thing. The person you're talking to doesn't care what you think. They don't care what your opinion is. And that's hard for us to understand because like, how could they not care what I think? No one cares what you think. People only care what they think, right? We're all selfish. So this person you're talking to, they don't care what you think at all. So don't even bother telling them. They don't care. And as soon as you tell them, then they start getting defensive and they start thinking about their attack back and it turns into a debate and that's not what we want. The goal instead is to find out where they formed their opinion and pull their opinion out of them. And that's my main point. If you're talking to someone who's pro-abortion or pro-choice, ask them where they got their opinion on this. Not why they think what they think, but where. And one of two things will happen. Either they will have this big dramatic story to share, or they have no idea where they formed this opinion. And either way, it's good, right? So if they have this big dramatic story, well, great, we can talk about it. If they have no idea, which is most often the case, then they themselves start to make their own cracks in their oh so precious opinion. Once they realize like, oh, I don't know where I first started thinking, right? That's an initial crack in their foundation. If it's that first person though, the person who has a profound story, that's great too. Unearth it, right? Sotomayor said that 25% of women, or Breyer, I should say, said that 25% of women had an abortion. Which means that, about that many men have been a part of one too. So that's 25 million women and about 25 million men or so have been a part of an abortion, right? So when you're talking to a pro-abortion person, they probably had one. Or their sister had one. Or they drove a college roommate to a Planned Parenthood or something like that. So they feel like they could never be against a woman's right to choose ever again because then they feel like they would be hypocrites, right? Because they've done it before, right? So, but you got to get someone to admit this and talk about this before you can ever send them on a potentially different path. So talk to them about how difficult it was, how scary it was, right? Someone who's had in a crisis pregnancy, I mean, it's shock and they're full of fear. It's a terrible thing to experience. So talk to them about this experience. If you want this person to change their mind ever, you have to get them back to their where. So here's what I mean. Here's how I visualize this. So you and this other person, you're going like this, see this works? You're going like this, and then at a certain point, something happens, there's a point of trauma, and you split. You're here, make sure I can fit this on the screen. You're here, and they're here. You're never gonna get them to jump from here to where you are. It's never gonna happen. You have to first bring them back to the pivot point, their where, bring them back here, meet them there, and then you can bring them to where you are. They're never gonna jump from here to here. It doesn't happen. You gotta get them back to their where and have them rethink that moment of trauma again and then come to different conclusions. Does that make sense? So the question is, how do I talk to them? If I'm here and they're here, how do I talk to them in a way that they can understand? Jonathan Haidt, in order to get back to the where, the point, the pivot point, Jonathan Haidt came up with this concept of moral foundations. So in short, conservatives and progressives are different. Conservatives' moral foundations are respect, authority, and purity. Progressives have a moral foundation of caring and fairness. So if you're talking to a progressive who is pro-choice or pro-abortion, they believe that that is the caring and fair position to have. In their mind, they are caring and fair. That's what matters. Now, to a conservative, we're about like the authority of the Bible, perhaps, right? Maybe that's why, or the purity of life. They don't think of that. It's about what's caring and fair. So you have to talk to them on your terms. You can scream at them all day about using your moral foundation, but it won't do anything. They're not listening. They don't hear it. You got to talk to them on their language, right? If you want to win an argument, great. But if you want to change minds, you have to speak in a language that their worldview understands. So, if you're talking to someone who's pro-abortion, frame everything as caring. So, is it caring to a mother to tell her that we can eliminate this problem when that's an irreversible decision that will probably cause a ton of trauma and regrets for the rest of your life? Is that caring? Is it caring to the baby, who of course has no say in its life? Progressives don't care about the baby though. They care more about the woman, I should say. So you don't have to bring up the baby, take that one back. Say, is it fair that a woman isn't even given a chance to be a great mom? Right? I know women who have walked into crisis pregnancy centers and they're freaking out and they say, I can't be a mom. I can't be a mom. And they're like, why not? Well, I don't even have a crib. And the pro-life pregnancy centers, they say, well, here's one. Here, take it. What else do you need? These centers give mom a fair chance. So just killing the baby, that's not even fair to the mom without giving her all of her options and without giving her all the chances to succeed. That's not caring, is it? Is it caring to live in a society that thinks of women as merely sex objects to be tossed aside because the man she had sex with doesn't want to be responsible for their child? Is that fair? Is it caring to consider a woman as nothing more than an employee and her happiness depends entirely on her career and how much money she can make, as if a baby is some sort of obstacle to true happiness? Is that caring? Is that fair? Whatever argument you make, if you're trying to change their mind, it needs to be in their language of caring and fairness. Again, if you're trying to win an argument, that's easy, right? You can't murder people, all right? Of course life begins at conception. Follow the science. A fetus is just a name of a different stage of human development, like toddler or teenager, right? A woman has the right to control her body until she decides to have sex with a man and gets pregnant, and then the rights of the baby trump the woman's right for the next 9 months. Don't have sex unless you're willing to raise a child with the man you're having sex with. I can win every abortion argument. But if you want to change someone's mind, that's a different story. Plant the seeds. Plant the seeds now of pro-life and a pro-life ethic. Talk about caring and fairness. After all, this person you're talking to is alive. You'd think they'd appreciate life. Good luck out there. Changing hearts and minds. It's a difficult thing to do. But is there any more important cause? Get out there, go save some lives. Mike Slater, spread the word.